Welcome to The Forum, your modern-day coffee house, where ideas can be birthed, exchanged, and wrestled with. We celebrate questions, conversation, and reason as powerful tools to enlighten hearts and transform minds, shaping a new generation of thinkers, innovators, and pioneers. We're glad you're here, so pull up a chair and let's begin.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to The Forum. Now, this morning, I am going to be exploring the subject of entropy. And I want you to treat me like ChatGPT this morning. If you're not familiar with ChatGPT, this is all that new AI stuff that everyone's talking about. Treat me like ChatGPT because I want you to do your own research. Don't necessarily trust every single thing I say. I've done some research. I've thought about this for like the whole week at least. But I've also only got GCSE science, so I'm not really qualified to talk about deep scientific subjects. If you are, and I know we have some experts in the room, just hold on to it while I'm speaking and come and see me afterwards and you can correct me in person. But the forum is all about sharing ideas, discussing them and wrestling with them. So let's begin. Have you ever had the disappointment of a cup of coffee or a mug of tea that's gone cold? Not from here. If you have had a taste of entropy. Have you ever stepped into your garden shed or garage and thought, how on earth did this get so messy? You have observed the evidence of entropy. Have you ever looked in the mirror and thought, how did we get here? If so, you may be looking at the consequences of entropy. So, what is entropy? Entropy is a scientific term from physics and thermodynamics, and it describes how systems tend to drift towards disorder unless energy is introduced to maintain some structure. But beyond science, I want to explore it as a powerful metaphor for life this morning. And you have to give me a little bit of poetic license within this, because the purpose of what we're doing this morning isn't just purely scientific, it's just considering how we live our lives better. Okay, so what do we mean by a system? We talked about how entropy describes how systems tend to drift towards disorder. Let's think about these systems. The universe is a system. The solar system is a system. A cup of tea is a system. A system is a set of connected parts working towards a purpose. You could say the forum is a system. A garden is a system. Your bedroom might be a system. A team is a system, an organization, your family, your relationships, your body, your mind, your life is a system. So let's consider how entropy might affect some systems that we are all familiar with. Your garden. Let's have a look at the garden. There we go. Your garden is a system. And what happens to a garden if you do nothing to tend it? Disorder, randomness, entropy increases. What happens to a relationship when you don't invest time and effort into it? It naturally breaks down. Disorder, randomness, or entropy increases. What happens to your house if you don't put time into cleaning it? It tends to become untidy. Naturally, it just descends into disorder. Entropy increases. What happens to your car over time if it's not serviced? It doesn't just stay in perfect order. It starts to break down naturally as entropy increases. And this building, the reason we are investing in the roof at the moment is because over time, entropy increases and things fall into disrepair. So entropy is a gradual drift towards disorder. Now, if this is sounding too complicated for you, then let me make it super simple. I had a book in my house growing up, and it was called Love Is. And this book contained quotes from primary school kids. Some of them were really cute. One of my favorites was, I love everyone and everything, even ants. Ants were made to be loved, not trodden on. Then there were some that were really sad, heartbreaking about families that are broken up. But then there was this one, which I love so much that we have it on our wall as you enter our house. It is, you must take care of love. If you don't, it goes bad. And that was from James, aged 5. And it turns out that at age 5, James had kind of grasped the second law of thermodynamics, that unless you put energy into a system, disorder or entropy will increase. So, there's our basic introduction into what entropy is. Things will descend into disorder, move towards chaos, unless we put energy into that system. So, I want us to consider now, for 5 minutes, a couple of questions. Where do you see entropy, disorder, or decay? Now, that might be literally, you might think, yep, I can see it in my sock drawer. Like, it starts in order, and then it just, how does it get there? Claire was talking about our washing pile last week. So, how does this just become such a disordered mess in my life? Now, you might want to look a little bit deeper at things in your life or your family or your work situation. How have things descended into disorder and entropy? Now, what would that area look like if entropy decreased and it was thriving and ordered? So there are the two things I want us to consider. I'm going to give you 5 minutes starting now. Hopefully we have understood that entropy is a measurement of disorder. And now I want us to explore what it takes to reduce some of the entropy we might have spotted and turn disorder into some constructive order. Now, Georgia was just saying order over and over again. And when I think of the word order, it just makes me think of one person for some reason. And so here's something a little funny that I found.
Order! 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 The order! 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 Man!
I love how even in the government of Britain, somebody literally has to be in the room to say order, because otherwise it all descends into chaos. So, Scott Peck is an American psychologist. He's influenced us a lot over the years here. And he said this. He said, life is difficult. And this is a great truth. It's one of the greatest truths. It's a great truth because once we truly see this truth, we transcend it. Once we truly know that life is difficult, and once we truly understand and accept it, then life is no longer difficult. Because once it's accepted, the fact that life is difficult no longer matters. I guess what he's basically saying there is, if you accept that life is difficult, it becomes a little bit less difficult. If you're constantly resisting, life should be easy, all of the traffic lights should be green all of the time, my sock drawer should stay tidy, everything should be ordered. If you have that expectation, you're going to live a lot of life disappointed. So sometimes accepting, okay, this is the natural order of what happens in the universe can actually help so that we engage productively. So why is life difficult? The simple answer is because it takes energy to lower entropy. Now, the scientific answer that's a little more complicated is that the second law of thermodynamics states that in a closed system, things tend to become more disordered unless energy is put into them. Now, more specifically, it's called directed energy, which scientists have a great name for. It's very clever. It is work. Work is the directed energy that it takes to lower entropy. So, life's difficult because the natural tendency of things is to fall apart. And this is that principle. But to build, maintain, and grow things, whether it's a habit, or a family, or a clean kitchen, or a tidy sock drawer, that requires some work. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. The garden metaphor. Now, I always think of Dave and Maggie's garden because it's absolutely beautiful. But I know it wasn't always as beautifully ordered as it was. It took Dave and Maggie an awful lot of hard work to make it as beautiful as it is. And your house, you have to put that work in to tidy, to clean, to make sure that things are ordered and organized. I was just saying, Amy loves labels. My sock drawer literally says socks on it. Like, our drawers are labeled so you know what goes where. I'm surprised that, I don't have a label on my arm just saying, belongs to Amy. But a system can actually really help us to lower that entropy. Muscles. If you want to build muscles, then actually you have to put the work into that. If you want to stay healthy, you have to put the work into that. It's obvious, and you might think, why are you standing on a stage wasting my time telling me this? I think sometimes we don't really consciously acknowledge it because we just think, well, things should just be better and I should just stay young and I should just stay healthy. But actually, sometimes accepting, no, life is difficult and it does take work, can be a reality check that we need. Your muscles don't stay strong on their own. If you stop exercising, you get weaker. And that's entropy at work. Strength takes sustained input, and so does character and creativity and faith and perseverance. All of these character traits as well take work to put in. So consider our physical development, our emotional development, even our spiritual development. Why are these so difficult? Because it takes energy to lower entropy. Now, Steven Pinker is a Canadian-American cognitive psychologist, and he has crazy hair. And he said this. He said, the ultimate purpose of life, mind, and human striving is to deploy energy and information to fight back the tide of entropy and carve out refuges of beneficial order. So I want us to consider something now as we chat. What is the work that you need to put into the systems of your life to reduce entropy? Now, if you want a simple explanation of our fight against entropy, I saw this in my mother-in-law's bathroom. It says, you don't need to clean all your teeth, only the ones you want to keep. And I want to use this. It's really silly, but I think it's quite a helpful model for maybe considering how we apply the next little bit. I want you to consider, how would you rephrase that for the area of your life that you want to create a little more order? You've got some examples on your table. It could be, so the one I thought of is, I sometimes feel like I should be friends like with everybody and I should be contacting everybody all the time. So mine might be, you don't have to be friends with everybody, only the people that you want to. That's a really simple example, but I want you to think of what would the examples be for you. Now, you've got slips on your table that provide you with examples, so if you want a really easy access point for this, have a look at those and see which ones most resonate with you, and you can chat around those. Or you can take a blank one and a pen and fill out the one that applies to you. And consider, what is the work that you're putting in, or you know you need to put in, to reduce the entropy or disorder in your life and create the order you're looking for. And for this section, let's have 7 minutes. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. So, we have considered the law of entropy that states that disorder is going to increase in a closed system, unless work is put in. Oh, that went flashy. I like that. That was interesting timing, wasn't it? How appropriate. So, what stops us putting the work in? If we know that there's a state that's becoming more disordered, why do we not go, yes, logically I will do the work that's required? This is where it gets complicated. I thought of 2 that I thought I'd explore. I'm sure there are all sorts of different reasons. But the first one I thought of is we think we can't be bothered. And I say that very purposefully. We think we can't be bothered. Managing the entropy of our lives is difficult, and sometimes we just think we can't be bothered. There's actually a funny picture I saw of this. There's a book called The Cat Who Couldn't Be Bothered. I've not read it, but I really want to. It just looks great. I think I'm going to buy it for Amy. The Cat That Couldn't Be Bothered. Now, I began the section earlier talking about a quote from Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled, where he talks about how life is difficult, and when you accept that, it becomes less difficult. Here's another quote that I heard recently. You may have seen this bouncing around social media. Marriage is hard. Divorce is hard. Choose your hard. Obesity is hard. But being fit and healthy is hard. Choose your hard. Being in debt is hard. But being financially disciplined is also hard. Choose your hard. Communication is hard. Not communicating is hard. Choose your hard. Life will never be easy. It will always be hard. But we can choose our hard. So pick wisely. Now, in other words, when we think we can't be bothered, I'm not sure that's true. Let me explain what I mean. We will be bothered either way. We'll either be bothered enough now to do something about it, or the consequences of that will bother us later on down the line. Often we call it delayed gratification. It's like if you wait now and put the effort in that's required now, then you get the benefit later. If you don't and you think, oh, I'm going to save that energy now, then actually it might sap you of the energy later when you're like, I can't find my tools in my shed because I didn't put the energy in before. Where are those blue socks? Because I didn't put the energy in before to do that. A relationship falls apart because I didn't put the energy in later. I never heard from that person, or why is there just nothing happening in this arena? Maybe that requires more energy down the line. I'll be more bothered here because I wasn't bothered here. So that's what my theory is. We'll be bothered one way or the other. We just need to consider at what point along that journey we want to be bothered by something, because it's going to require energy either way. Okay, so that might be one reason that stops us from putting that work in to reduce the entropy. The second one is that the work is outsourced. Last week, Claire was talking about the theory of let them from Mel Robbins. And one of the questions that came up when we were chatting was, well, what is my responsibility in life and what isn't my responsibility? Now, sometimes we might, for example, with the roof, we're not all roofers, so we can't be like, we should take responsibility for fixing the roof. So we're going to legitimately outsource that to someone else. And they're doing a great job. But there are occasions where I think we outsource the responsibility in our lives for the things that are our responsibility to someone else. Or maybe we're the person that is taking up too much responsibility for things that actually somebody else needs to be putting the work in. Have you ever done that? Have you ever taken responsibility for something that wasn't your responsibility? And I wonder why we do that, because I think on the surface we think, well, it's a virtuous, generous thing to do. And it can be in certain situations. But I think there's two potential outcomes of that I just wanted to consider this morning. One is that when we take responsibility for things that should be someone else's responsibility, we can promote incompetence and we can uphold a failing system. Let's just have a look at these two. So, I used to work as a support worker for guys with autism. And as part of my training on promoting independence, my job was not to do the cleaning for people or the cooking for people or their shopping. I was there to train them to do it. So we were taught about this cycle of opportunities, experience, and growth. And the way it worked was, often people with particular learning disabilities will struggle to get opportunities. And the reason they'll struggle to get opportunities is because they don't have what it takes to take the opportunities when they come. So you need to give them experiences. And when you give them experiences, then actually they grow, and then that creates more opportunities the next time. And I think it's the same for all of us. It's like with our kids. If you do everything for your kids, then actually they're never going to grow to be able to take the opportunities that come up. So then they're never going to grow through those opportunities, etc. So there's a cycle where actually we can promote incompetence for someone else when we do everything for them, rather than training them to step up. Do you remember we talked about the drama triangle a few years ago? And the whole part of the drama triangle is that you have these three characters that we each play. We can play the hero, where we step in to save the victim. And the victim is someone who we perceive is being oppressed or wrongly treated by the villain. Ooh. So we have villain, victim, and hero. And when we perceive somebody to be a victim, some of us love to step in and be the hero. Anybody in here have that tendency to be the hero? And I think it's something, especially within church, where it's something that we've been really encouraged to. Being generous to people and loving people is something that is hugely powerful. I'm going to touch on that later. But the wisdom is knowing what love looks like within that context. And for the hero, which, again, this is something I've had a tendency to fall into, the challenge for the hero is not to save a person, but to train a person. And for the victim, rather than being someone that's like, save me, it's to become somebody who actually grows and can go through that training to be creative for themselves and create solutions. Okay, so we talked about how one of the consequences of outsourcing responsibility is promoting incompetence, and the other one is upholding a failing system. Is anybody familiar with George Orwell's novel Animal Farm? So Animal Farm is a story about a farm where the animals on the farm are oppressed. And in the story, the animals overthrow their oppressive farmer, hoping to build a fairer society under the leadership of the pigs. Now, the new regime promises equality. They say all animals are equal, but it quickly becomes apparent that some animals are more equal than others. And as the pigs consolidate their power, the animals are tasked with building a windmill on the top of the hill as a symbol of their progress. Now, Boxer is the horse in the story, and I was really reminded of Boxer as somebody who upheld a failing system. He's driven by this loyalty and this motto, I will work harder. So he's driven all the time to put work in. But actually, he gives more than anyone else, and he ends up sacrificing himself to the point of death because actually the system wasn't working, but because he put so much in to carry the whole thing, actually nobody ever realized that things weren't working. One thing that we've not really mentioned yet is that entropy is a natural thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Everything dies, but then everything can regenerate. If you look at the growth of a tree or anything in nature, even the cells in our body, things have entropy happens to them and then they regenerate. And there's this cycle in life of order and then disorder and then reorder. And we're part of that process. Sometimes things need to fail and some things need to fall apart. And sometimes we can hold on to them so much because we don't want to see the sadness of them falling apart. But sometimes they need to. So let's explore a couple of questions. Have you ever thought, I can't be bothered, and ended up being bothered by the consequences of that later on? What are the reasons you avoid putting the necessary work in to bring order to your life? And do you ever find yourself putting the work in for someone else when it's really their responsibility? What are the reasons you do this? And do others do this for you? That's a tricky one. Do you ever spot where actually maybe you could be stepping up and maybe should be stepping up more, but somebody else is filling the gap and so you don't? So we've got about 10 or 15 minutes to give you this. There's plenty to chat through, and then I will wrap up. Now, the forum is not about learning what to think. We do not come here to learn what to think, but we have an opportunity and an invitation to think. So, I wonder what questions this has raised for you. It's definitely raised some questions for me, some that I'm not sure what the answers are, but I thought it might be worth throwing them out. I'll explain where I've got to a little with my very brief research, but some of you might have more answers for me than I realize, so I would love to chat about this more, even though this has been consuming my brain for a whole week. And this is a really interesting example of how if you decrease entropy, like I'm trying to do to you, trying to introduce an idea so that it may brings a little more order to your life. One of the rules of entropy is that it will increase or entropy somewhere else. So my life has become a little bit disordered this week. I haven't played my saxophone a week because I've put all my time into thinking about this in order to try and create some order somewhere else. And that's kind of one of the laws of how entropy works. Now, here's some that have come to mind for me. If everything is naturally moving towards chaos, then why is there life in the first place? How did we happen? How did life happen if there was a big bang or everything just came from a huge chemical process and a scientific process? How did we have life? If everything is supposed to fall apart, why do we care so much about putting things back together? Well, Kev introduced me to a guy called Professor Tom Campbell, and he proposes an idea that consciousness has evolved to reduce entropy. And that even though entropy drives the universe towards disorder, human consciousness has arisen or evolved as a local energy-fueled response to resist that decay. Life might even be a sign that the system isn't entirely closed. So within the idea of entropy, The idea is that disorder increases in a closed system. Apart from we often don't live in a closed system. For example, the Earth is not a closed system. Energy comes in from the sun. So the sun's coming in as this energy that's coming into our planet. Now, big question is the universe a closed system? Because we haven't yet flown a rocket out and hit the wall on the edge of the universe. Now, the theory is often based around the idea that the universe is a closed system. I don't know whether it is. I wonder whether it is. It seems from my research that people don't really know. Is there something beyond the universe? Where is all this going is another question I asked. Big picture. If energy is naturally dispersing and entropy is increasing, everything is becoming more disordered, then what does that mean for the universe? Well, bad news and good news, everybody. The bad news is that, according to this theory, we are ultimately heading towards the heat death of the universe, when every star, including our sun, has burnt out and all the energy is basically equalized to a state of a universal cup of cold tea. Basically, we'll be in a state where everything's equalized, life won't be able to be sustained, game over. But the good news is that along the way, we can move energy around and we can create conditions for life to thrive. So what does entropy have to do with love? This is a question that occurred to me this morning. Now let me explain what I mean. What is love? When you love someone, you are expending energy. You are choosing effort. Scott Peck, that we mentioned earlier, he says this quote, "Love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth." I think when we love someone, we are intentionally acting in order to bring more order, in order to decrease some entropy, in order to bring growth and connection, both within ourselves and within others. And if entropy is this natural drift towards disorder, then love is the conscious decision to resist that drift, to extend energy beyond what's convenient or what's comfortable. Love might mean watering your garden, as Stickley was saying this morning. She's been putting the effort into loving her garden. It might mean sweeping your house. It might mean showing up in a relationship when it would be easier to stay away. It might mean even be willing to risk causing some disorder, asking some questions that might ruffle feathers in order that that process might ultimately bring more growth and more life-giving order. This guy, Tom Campbell, he proposes that love is the driving force in the universe. He says these things: the fundamental process of our evolution is to lower entropy. He says love is the result of a low entropy consciousness. And our purpose here is to grow up, reduce the entropy of our consciousness, and evolve towards love. So, entropy is real. It's important that we accept that it's real and observe it in our life. We've done that in some very practical things like our shed, our sock drawer, but also our relationships, maybe within your work. Another thought that's come to mind for me this week is purpose. Now, let me show you the link. We have a reason why we do the things that we do. But I think even the ideas we have about why we do what we do can crumble and we can start to forget why things are so important. I just wanted to drop that in this week. If there are things in your life where you're starting to resent them or just begrudgingly get on with them, pause this week and consider, what is the purpose of those things? It might be a relationship that just feels like entropy is taken over and it just feels like it's all become disordered and you think that's not what it once was. I think purpose can help us get back there when we realize why something's important in the first place. It produces a passion. I was talking to a friend about this yesterday, even when it comes to your employment. If your employment is just about the duty of turning up, then it's very much worth looking at why you do the thing, because that can reignite a passion for something. So left alone, things will unravel, energy will run down, and order will dissolve. Systems will decay. And entropy reminds us that growth requires energy or work. Order doesn't maintain itself, and the systems of our lives, whether it's our families, the teams we're in, our habits, or our hearts, need input in order to stay alive. So the question isn't whether disorder is going to happen, because it will. The questions I want to leave you with is, where are you going to put your energy? Where are you going to put the work of your life? What systems will you open up? Maybe so that others can put some work into you, or maybe how are you going to open up to put work into others? But also, what kind of order are you willing to work for? We can't escape the effort that's required for life, but we can choose the kind of difficult that we want to shape our life. So let's choose growth over comfort, responsibility over rescuing others, and choose to engage with entropy, because I think that is where meaning lives.